A cocky boxer underestimates an aging janitor in the ring, brutally humiliating three elderly veterans who dared to challenge his undefeated record. The arrogant champion forces the 72-year-old former welterweight to his knees, breaks the gentle giant's wrist with a sickening crack, and even urinates in their sacred ring to mark his territory. But the quiet janitor mopping floors in the corner isn't just another old man. This is Donnie Yen, the legendary martial arts master who made grown men tremble in Hong Kong action films for decades. The heavyweight has no idea, he just desecrated a sanctuary in front of a man who's forgotten more about fighting than most will ever learn. While the bully flexes for his cameras, thinking he's conquered a gym full of has-beens, the Wing Chun grandmaster sets down his mop and steps forward with the calm of someone who's ended careers with a single punch. The old veterans recognize the predator emerging from behind the janitor's uniform and step back, knowing the champion's about to learn why legends never truly retire. The boxer's crew keeps filming, expecting to capture another easy beatdown, but they're actually recording the moment their undefeated hero meets his match. What happens when raw arrogance collides with 40 years of martial arts mastery? Will the cocky champion survive his first real fight? What happened next would terrorize the bully for the rest of his pathetic career. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Dawn broke over South Philadelphia like a promise kept, casting long shadows through the grimy windows of Mickey's community boxing gym. Bobby Kowalski moved through his morning ritual with the precision of a man who'd done this for 15 years straight, shadowboxing alone in the center ring, his 72-year-old hands still quick despite the arthritis that made his knuckles look like gnarled tree roots. The gym was a time capsule, frozen somewhere between Rocky Balboa's glory days and the harsh reality of urban decay. Faded photographs of local boxing legends line the walls like ghosts watching over their domain. Fighters with names like Lightning, Lou DeMarco, and Iron Mike, Torino, men who'd made this neighborhood proud back when the world still cared about heart over hype. The heavy bags hung from chains that had seen better decades, their leather surfaces worn smooth by countless combinations. The ring itself dominated the center of the space, its ropes loose and canvas stained with the sweat and blood of forgotten warriors. Bobby threw a crisp 1-2 combination, his footwork still textbook perfect even if his legs moved like they were underwater. The sound of his breathing echoed in the empty gym, a steady rhythm that had become as much a part of this place as the smell of old leather and liniment. At exactly 6:30, Eddie Martinez pushed through the front door, moving with the ramrod posture of a man who'd never quite left the military behind. At 68, the Vietnam veteran still carried himself like the Marine sergeant he'd been in another lifetime, though the slight tremor in his hands betrayed the Parkinson's that had crept into his life 5 years ago like an unwelcome visitor. "Morning, Bobby," Eddie called out, his voice carrying the gravel of a man who'd shouted orders over helicopter rotors and artillery fire. "How's the shoulder?" "Same as yesterday," Bobby replied without breaking his rhythm. Stiff as a board, but still swinging. Lou Castellano arrived at 7 sharp, his massive 6'6" frame filling the doorway like a gentle giant from a children's story. At 70 and 280 pounds, he moved with the careful deliberation of a man whose knees had absorbed decades of punishment, but his eyes remained kind, the sort of eyes that belonged to someone who'd rather build than destroy. "Boys," Lou nodded, his voice soft as always. He'd tried professional boxing for exactly 3 fights before deciding he was too gentle for the sport's brutality. Construction work had suited him better, building things instead of tearing them down. The 3 old warriors had maintained this schedule religiously since Mickey Torino died 6 months ago, leaving the gym to a nephew who wanted nothing more than to sell the building and cash out. They came here because this place gave them purpose, a reason to get up each morning and remember what they'd once been. The gym served more than just their nostalgia. The attached community center fed 200 low-income families, provided after-school tutoring for neighborhood kids, and offered the kind of safe haven that kept children off streets where hope went to die. City tax liens were piling up like autumn leaves, and they were 3 months behind on rent, but none of that mattered when they were here, training like the fighters they'd once been. As the morning sun climbed higher, Bobby noticed something different. The gym was spotless, floors mopped to a mirror shine, equipment organized with military precision. Even the loose speed bag mount had been repaired sometime in the night. They exchanged glances, wondering about their mysterious, early-rising janitor who seemed to work like a ghost, appearing before dawn and vanishing into shadows. At exactly 8 o'clock, Donnie Yen entered through the back door with the quiet efficiency of morning mist. He carried his janitor's uniform folded with military precision and a simple brown paper bag containing his lunch, the same meal he'd brought every day for 5 years: rice, vegetables, and tea in a thermos that had seen better decades. "Morning, Danny," Bobby called out, using the Americanized version of a name they couldn't properly pronounce. The old boxers had long since given up trying to wrap their tongues around the complexities of Cantonese, but their warmth was genuine. Yin nodded with a slight smile that never quite reached his eyes, a ghost of the charisma that had once lit up movie screens across Asia. At 61, he moved with an economy of motion that spoke of decades spent perfecting every gesture, every breath, every step. His lean frame carried not an ounce of wasted muscle, built for function rather than show. He understood every word they spoke, caught every nuance of their conversations, but his responses remained limited to nods, smiles, and the occasional yes or thank you delivered in heavily accented English. It was easier this way. Let them think he was just another immigrant janitor grateful for honest work. As he changed into his work clothes, Yin watched the old boxers train with the intense focus of a scholar studying ancient texts. His hands moved subtly at his sides, unconsciously mirroring their combinations, his body remembering forms and techniques that most men spent lifetimes trying to master. When Bobby threw a particularly sweet left hook, Yin's own left hand twitched almost imperceptibly, muscle memory firing across decades of conditioning. His routine never varied, methodical cleaning that turned janitorial work into meditation. Every surface cleaned with purpose, every piece of equipment positioned exactly where it should be. The old boxers had learned to respect his dedication. He worked harder than men half his age and never missed a day, never complained, never asked for anything beyond his modest weekly paycheck. They didn't know about the small apartment above Wang's Chinese restaurant 2 blocks away, where Yin lived alone among sparse furnishings and memories of a life that felt like someone else's dream. They didn't know about the Hong Kong movie, posters rolled up in his closet, or the reviews written in languages they couldn't read, praising a man named Donnie Yen who'd once been called the greatest action star of his generation. All they knew was that their janitor had unusual calluses on his hands, not the soft patches of a man who pushed mops and carried buckets, but the hard ridges of someone who'd spent decades conditioning his fists against wooden training dummies and leather-heavy bags. They'd noticed how he moved through their space, never bumping into equipment, always aware of everything happening around him with the hyper-awareness of a predator disguised as prey. Yin finished organizing his cleaning supplies with the same precision he brought to everything else. Each bottle had its place, each tool its purpose. He'd purchased them all with his own money, top-quality materials that lasted longer and worked better than the cheap alternatives the gym's budget could afford. As he began his morning cleaning routine, the peaceful quiet of Mickey's gym was shattered by the sound of slamming car doors echoing through the morning air like gunshots. Through the front windows, they could see a convoy of black SUVs and a bright red Ferrari that cost more than most people made in 5 years. Bobby stopped mid-combination, sweat suddenly cold on his forehead. "Oh hell, what now?" Eddie moved toward the window with the cautious steps of a soldier approaching unknown territory. Expensive suited men were unloading camera equipment with the efficiency of a military operation, their movements coordinated and purposeful. Yin paused in his mopping, his grip tightening on the handle as he watched the commotion unfold. Something in his posture shifted almost imperceptibly, the humble janitor's mask slipping just enough to reveal the predator beneath. Tyler Thunder Briggs exploded through the front door like a force of nature convinced of its own importance. At 26, he stood 6'4" and weighed 240 pounds of chemically enhanced muscle wrapped in a $5,000 tracksuit that screamed money louder than his voice. Gold chains caught the morning light around his neck, and designer sunglasses hid eyes that had never learned the difference between confidence and arrogance. His entourage followed like remora fish trailing a shark. Manager Rick Santelli in his $1,000 suit checking his phone every 30 seconds. Trainer, Iron Mike. Morrison carrying equipment bags that cost more than the old boxers monthly. Social security checks, and a camera crew led by videographer Jamie Chun, who looked increasingly uncomfortable with each passing minute. 3 bodyguards brought up the rear, their movements aggressive and unnecessary in a gym full of senior citizens. But Briggs liked the theater of intimidation. His undefeated record of 32 wins with 28 knockouts had made him rich beyond his wildest teenage dreams and insufferable beyond anyone else's tolerance. Well, 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 Briggs announced, his voice carrying the theatrical boom of a man who'd learned to project personality for the cameras. Look what we have here, a museum with gloves. He strutted through the gym like he owned it, examining the equipment with the disdain of a food critic in a truck stop diner. Jesus Christ, this stuff belongs in the Smithsonian. When's the last time anyone under 60 threw a punch in here? His camera crew began filming immediately, capturing every crude observation for his YouTube channel Thunder Strikes, where millions of subscribers paid to watch him humiliate opponents and mock anyone who couldn't fight back. This was content gold, authentic old-school atmosphere complete with genuine fossils to mock. Here's the deal, granddads, Briggs continued, pulling off his sunglasses to reveal cold, predatory eyes that had never reflected genuine warmth. I'm Tyler Thunder Briggs, undefeated heavyweight champion of the world, and I'm here to offer you old-timers the chance of a lifetime. He paused for dramatic effect, letting the camera capture his perfect profile. I'll fight any 3 of you as being simultaneously. Winner takes 10 grand. Losers get a lesson in why some people should stay retired. Eddie Martinez stepped forward, his military bearing intact despite the tremor in his hands. Son, this isn't some carnival sideshow. This is a place where real fighters trained. Briggs laughed, the sound harsh and grating in the sacred space. Real fighters? Look around, Pops. I see a nursing home with speed bags. You probably need help getting your gloves on. He walked to the ring and slapped the loose ropes dismissively. This piece of shit wouldn't pass safety inspection at a high school. But hey, it's perfect for what I have in mind. A little old-fashioned education about knowing your place. Bobby felt his Irish temper flaring, the same fire that had carried him through 15 years of professional boxing. We may be old, but we still remember how to handle punks who don't know respect. Respect? Briggs spun around, his face lighting up with malicious glee. Old man, respect is earned in the ring, not given out like participation trophies. You want my respect? Step up and take it. Lou Castellano tried to be the peacemaker, his gentle nature recoiling from the unnecessary confrontation. There's no need for this, son. We're just trying to keep a community center running. Community center? Briggs examined the old photographs on the walls, pointing at faces that had once been local legends. More like a graveyard for dreams that died when Kennedy was president. Time for some urban renewal, don't you think? In the corner, unnoticed and dismissed, Yen continued his methodical mopping. But his movements had become more deliberate, and anyone who truly understood fighting might have noticed that his grip on the mop handle had shifted from janitorial to something that resembled a weapon grip. The tension in the room built like pressure in a steam engine as Briggs continued his verbal assault, each insult designed to provoke exactly the response he needed for his cameras. He was hunting for content, and old men's pride was exactly the kind of prey that made for viral gold. Bobby Kowalski stepped forward despite Eddie's restraining hand on his shoulder. At 72, he still carried himself like the welterweight contender he'd once been, his chin up and shoulders square. I'll fight you, son, Bobby said quietly, his voice carrying the dignity of a man who'd never backed down from anything in his life. Been in this ring longer than you've been breathing. Briggs removed his sunglasses completely, revealing eyes that glittered with predatory satisfaction. Perfect. Hope Medicare covers dental work, Grandpa. The makeshift arena took shape with the efficiency of a well-rehearsed performance. Briggs' crew pushed the old boxers back, creating space for their cameras to capture every angle of the coming humiliation. Rick Santelli barked orders about lighting and positioning while Iron Mike Morrison prepared his fighter with the casual indifference of a man who'd seen too many mismatches. Bobby climbed through the ropes with Eddie and lose help, his movements careful but determined. His faded training gear told the story of decades spent in rings just like this one. Trunks that once proudly displayed Lightning Bobby, now worn to illegibility, hand wraps applied with tape that had seen better decades. At 72, he looked exactly like what he was, an old man trying to remember what it felt like to be young and dangerous. Briggs stripped to designer shorts that probably cost more than Bobby's monthly rent, his perfect physique gleaming under the gym's harsh fluorescent lights like a marble statue carved by someone who'd confused muscle with character. The contrast was brutal and intentional. Youth versus age, perfection versus decay, the future destroying the past for entertainment. The bell rang. Actually, Bobby's grandson banging a wrench against a heating pipe, and Briggs moved forward with the casual confidence of a cat playing with wounded prey. His first combinations came at half speed, designed not to end the fight, but to extend the humiliation for maximum camera time. "Come on, Pops," Briggs taunted, circling the older man with theatrical footwork. "My grandmother hits harder than that, and she's been dead for 10 years. Bobby threw everything he had. Combinations that would have been devastating 30 years ago, but now moved through air thick as molasses. His warrior's heart remained intact, but his 72-year-old body couldn't cash the checks his pride was writing. Each missed punch drew laughter from Briggs' entourage and gasps of concern from the growing crowd of neighbors drawn by the commotion. Briggs landed light jabs that stung without damaging, body shots that doubled Bobby over without dropping him, footwork that made the old boxer look like he was fighting in quicksand. The camera captured every stumble, every moment of confusion, every flash of pain that crossed Bobby's weathered features. "This is what happens when fossils try to play with evolution," Briggs announced to his camera, never breaking rhythm as he landed another stinging combination. Natural selection in action, folks. After 3 minutes that felt like hours, Briggs drove a series of body shots into Bobby's midsection that forced the old boxer to his knees. The sound Bobby made, part grunt, part sob, cut through the gym's stale air like a blade. "Beg for mercy, Grandpa," Briggs demanded, standing over his fallen opponent like a conqueror. "Tell everyone watching that you're too old for this shit, and maybe I'll let you crawl out of here with some dignity." Bobby's granddaughter Janet burst through the crowd, her medical student instincts overriding everything else as she rushed toward the ring. At 28, she carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who'd learned early that the world didn't give points for being nice. But she'd also inherited her grandfather's stubborn refusal to back down from bullies. When Bobby refused to beg, shaking his head with the last remnants of his pride, Briggs shoved him backward into the ropes. The old boxer's head snapped back with a sound that made everyone wince, and he slid to the canvas like a marionette with cut strings. Blood trickled from his nose, mixing with tears of frustration and rage. Janet vaulted into the ring, her face flushed with fury as she knelt beside her grandfather. "You son of a bitch," she spat at Briggs, her voice carrying the kind of controlled anger that medical professionals learn to channel into saving lives. He's had enough. But Briggs was already flexing for the cameras, his perfect smile reflecting the satisfaction of a job well done. The crowd's shocked silence only amplified his performance. This was exactly the kind of content that went viral, the moment when reality became entertainment and human dignity became a punchline. Eddie Martinez couldn't watch anymore. Despite being 68 with hands that shook from Parkinson's, despite knowing he was walking into the same slaughter that had just destroyed his best friend, the old Marine climbed through the ropes. With the grim determination of a soldier advancing on an enemy position. "You son of a bitch," Eddie said quietly, his voice carrying the authority of a man who'd given orders under fire. "He's done enough." Briggs' eyes lit up with sadistic pleasure. Another volunteer meant more content, more humiliation, more proof of his dominance over a generation that had forgotten its place in the natural order. In the corner, unnoticed by everyone except the old boxers who'd learned to read the signs, Donnie Yen had stopped mopping. His grip on the handle had shifted imperceptibly, and something in his stillness suggested a predator deciding whether the moment had come to reveal itself. Eddie Martinez climbed into the ring with the careful movements of a man whose body had been betrayed by time and disease, but whose spirit remained unbroken. The Parkinson's tremor in his hands seemed more pronounced under the harsh lights, but his military bearing held firm, shoulders back, chin up, eyes focused on the enemy. "Look at this," Briggs announced to his cameras, bouncing on his toes. Like a prizefighter warming up for the main event. Parkinson's versus perfection. This is what happens when the old guard refuses to step aside for progress. The disease made Eddie's balance uncertain, his timing unreliable, but 68 years of life had taught him that sometimes you fight not because you can win, but because someone has to make a stand. His first combination came from muscle. Memory forged in Marine Corps training and sharpened in countless gym wars. Textbook form betrayed by hands that no longer obeyed his commands completely. Briggs danced around him like a matador toying with an aging bull, landing precise shots to Eddie's midsection that doubled him over repeatedly. When the old Marine tried to clinch for stability, Briggs threw him to the canvas with theatrical force, ensuring the cameras captured every moment of degradation. "Shake it off, Grandpa," Briggs taunted, his voice carrying across the gym like a loudspeaker at a public execution. "Or wait, you can't, can you? That's the beauty of evolution. It weeds out the weak." Despite the disease ravaging his nervous system, Eddie managed to land 2 solid shots that actually surprised Briggs, proving that heart could still triumph over circumstance, if only for fleeting moments. The crowd stirred hopefully, but reality reasserted itself quickly as Eddie's legs betrayed him, sending him stumbling into the ropes. Janet moved to help again, but Lou Castellano's massive frame was already filling the ring entrance. At 6'6" and 280 pounds, he represented the last hope. If size and reach couldn't overcome youth and cruelty, nothing could. "That's enough, son," Lou said quietly, his voice carrying the gentle authority of a man who'd spent his life building rather than destroying. "You proved your point." But Briggs saw only opportunity, the biggest target yet, the chance for maximum impact when the gentle giant fell. His eyes gleamed with anticipation as Lou climbed through the ropes, moving with the careful deliberation of a man whose knees had absorbed decades of punishment, but whose protective instincts remained razor-sharp. In the back corner, Yen's cleaning had become something else entirely. His movements held a different quality now, less janitor and more predator. The mop handle rested differently in his grip, and his positioning had shifted to provide optimal viewing angles of the ring while maintaining proximity to his utility closet. The old boxers noticed what others missed. The way Yen's breathing had changed, becoming deeper and more controlled. The way his feet had found a stance that looked casual but spoke of decades spent perfecting balance and positioning. The way his eyes tracked every movement in the ring with the intensity of a scholar studying sacred texts. Something was building in the corner, something that had nothing to do with janitorial duties and everything to do with the precise moment when patience transforms into action. Lou Castellano moved through the ropes like a mountain coming to life, his massive frame casting shadows across the ring despite the overhead lights. Despite his age and the surgically repaired knees that creaked with every step, he possessed the kind of physical presence that made smaller men reconsider their choices, except for men like Tyler Briggs, who saw only another aging target for his entertainment empire. "I don't want to fight you, young man," Lou said softly, his voice carrying the patient tone of someone who'd spent years talking construction crews through dangerous situations. "But I won't let you hurt my friends anymore." Briggs studied the gentle giant with the cold calculation of a predator sizing up prey. Lou's kindness was written in every line of his face, the sort of genuine goodness that belonged to someone who'd rather suffer himself than see others in pain. To Briggs, this wasn't character. It was weakness waiting to be exploited. "Big man, soft heart," Briggs announced to his cameras, circling Lou like a shark scenting blood. "Let's see how gentle you are when someone's rearranging your face." The first exchanges revealed why Lou had lasted only 3 professional fights. He absorbed punishment that would have dropped smaller men, his size and natural toughness keeping him upright, but his gentle nature made him hesitate at crucial moments. He landed heavy shots that rocked Briggs backward, proving that power still resided in those massive hands, but he pulled his punches at the last second, unwilling to truly hurt even someone who deserved it. For a brief moment, the crowd sensed an upset brewing. Lou's reach advantage and raw strength created problems Briggs hadn't faced in his carefully orchestrated career. The champion's perfect record suddenly seemed vulnerable against this soft-spoken giant who absorbed punishment like a human wall. But Briggs was 20 years younger and infinitely more vicious. When conventional boxing failed to break Lou's will, he shifted tactics with the ruthless pragmatism of someone who'd learned that rules were suggestions for people who couldn't afford to break them. The wrestling hold came without warning. Briggs caught Lou's massive arm and twisted with the savage efficiency of someone who'd studied every way to hurt another human being. The sound of Lou's wrist breaking was audible throughout the gym, a sharp crack that silenced every conversation and stopped every heartbeat. Lou's scream of pain cut through the air like a physical thing, a sound that belonged to someone discovering that trust could be weaponized against kindness. He cradled his shattered wrist against his chest, tears streaming down his weathered face. Not from pain, though that was considerable, but from the humiliation of having his gentle nature used as a weapon against him. "This is what happens when fossils forget their place," Briggs announced, standing over his latest victim like a conqueror surveying ruins. But his final act of dominance transcended mere victory. He walked to the corner of the ring and urinated, marking his territory like an animal claiming dominance over conquered ground. The crowd fell into stunned silence. Even his own camera crew looked disgusted, their equipment capturing something that had crossed the line from entertainment into something darker and more primitive. In that moment of shocked quiet, a sound cut through the silence like a blade, the clatter of a mop handle hitting the concrete floor. Every eye turned toward the corner where Donnie Yen stepped forward, his janitor's uniform somehow carrying more dignity than Briggs' expensive gear. Donnie Yen walked across the gym floor with measured steps that seemed to count the heartbeats between patience and action. The crowd parted instinctively, sensing something fundamental had shifted in the room's atmosphere. His voice, when he finally spoke, cut through the silence with quiet authority. "You fight me now." The words were simple, accented but precise, each syllable carefully chosen and delivered with the weight of absolute certainty. Yen's English was clearer than he'd ever let them hear before, the humble janitor's mask beginning to slip away like morning fog burned off by rising sun. Briggs and his entourage erupted into laughter that echoed off the gym's brick walls. The absurdity was too perfect, the skinny old janitor challenging the heavyweight champion of the world. Rick Santelli nearly choked on his energy drink while Iron Mike Morrison shook his head in disbelief. "What are you gonna do, mop me to death?" Briggs wheezed between fits of laughter, his crew capturing every moment for what they assumed would be the comedy highlight of their YouTube empire. "Does your nursing home know you're out past curfew, Grandpa?" But something in Yen's stillness unsettled them. He didn't react to the insults, didn't show anger or fear or any of the emotions they'd come to expect from their victims. He simply stood there, breathing slowly, watching Briggs with the patient attention of someone studying a particularly interesting insect. "I clean Jim," Yen said quietly, his accent thickening the words but not their meaning. "You dirty Jim. Now I clean you." He walked to his utility closet with the same methodical precision he brought to every task, emerging with a pair of boxing gloves that told a different story than anything else in Mickey's gym. These weren't the standard issue training gloves hanging on hooks around the walls. These were personal equipment, old but perfectly maintained, with Wing Chun embroidered in Chinese characters across the cuffs. The old boxers noticed what others missed. Bobby's eyes widened as he watched Yen's hand-wrapping technique. Flawless, practiced, the movements of someone who'd done this thousands of times in rings that mattered. Eddie recognized the pre-fight ritual, the way Yen's breathing shifted into a different rhythm entirely. "Look at his hands," Bobby whispered to Eddie, loud enough for Lou to hear despite his pain. "Those aren't janitor's hands." The calluses were wrong. Not the soft patches of someone who pushed mops and carried buckets, but the hard ridges of knuckles conditioned against wooden training dummies. The scars told stories of decades spent perfecting techniques that most people only saw in movies. Briggs agreed to the fight with the casual confidence of someone who'd never faced real opposition. The social media potential was enormous. Breaking: heavyweight champion destroys senior citizen janitor. His subscriber count would explode overnight. "This is going to be great content," he told his camera crew, stripping off his tracksuit to reveal the kind of physique that belonged on magazine covers. Make sure you get the part where I put this fossil in the hospital. Yen removed his janitor's uniform with deliberate care, folding it neatly and setting it aside like someone preparing for ceremony rather than combat. When he turned back to face the ring, the transformation was startling. Gone was the humble maintenance worker, replaced by something lean and dangerous and perfectly balanced. His torso told stories and scars, each mark a lesson learned in gyms and studios across the world. This wasn't the soft body of a man who cleaned floors for a living. This was functional muscle, built for speed and precision rather than show. The contrast was stark and unsettling. Briggs represented everything modern fitness culture valued: size, definition, the kind of perfection that looked good in photographs. Yen embodied something older and more dangerous: economy of motion, practical strength, the kind of conditioning that came from decades of actual fighting rather than posing. As they prepared to enter the ring, the atmosphere shifted again. The crowd sensed they were about to witness something unprecedented, though none of them could have predicted exactly what that might be. The makeshift ring had become a coliseum, surrounded by 50 people drawn from the neighborhood by word of mouth and the magnetic pull of impending violence. Briggs shadowboxed with theatrical flair, throwing combinations designed more for the cameras than for warming up, his perfect form generating appreciative murmurs from spectators who didn't understand the difference between technique and performance. Yen stood perfectly still in his corner, eyes closed, breathing with the controlled rhythm of someone entering a meditative state. His stillness was absolute, the kind of motionlessness that spoke of decades spent learning to find center before storm. The bell rang, Bobby's wrench against the heating pipe, and Briggs charged forward like a bull convinced of its own invincibility. His opening combination should have ended the fight immediately, a massive overhand right with enough power to drop a horse, followed by a left hook designed to catch anything trying to escape the first shot's devastation. But Yen wasn't there. He moved with fluid precision that seemed to bend physics, the punches whistling past his head by margins measured in millimeters. No wasted motion, no dramatic evasions, just subtle shifts in position and timing that turned Briggs' overwhelming power into empty air and frustrated grunts. For 2 minutes, Briggs threw everything in his considerable arsenal: jabs, crosses, hooks, uppercuts. Combinations that had destroyed 32 previous opponents crashed harmlessly around Yen like waves against a cliff face. The champion's breathing grew labored, his perfect form beginning to deteriorate as desperation crept into his technique. The crowd's mood shifted from amusement to amazement. They were watching something impossible: a 61-year-old janitor making a heavyweight champion look like an amateur, throwing wild haymakers in a barroom brawl. Then Yen struck. 3 punches, so fast they seemed to happen simultaneously. Lightning-fast strikes to Briggs' ribs that landed with surgical precision, targeting nerve clusters and pressure points that most fighters didn't know existed. The champion's eyes widened in shock as pain exploded through his midsection. Real pain, the kind he'd never experienced in his carefully orchestrated career. Briggs dropped to one knee, his perfect physique doubled over as he struggled to process what had just happened. The gym erupted in shocked exclamations as the undefeated champion knelt before a man old enough to be his grandfather. "What the hell?" Briggs gasped, his voice strained with disbelief and the first taste of genuine fear he'd ever experienced in a boxing ring. Yen stepped back and executed a perfect bow, his movements carrying the formal respect of traditional martial arts. When he spoke, his English was clearer than anyone had ever heard it, each word precisely enunciated and heavy with meaning. "Round 1, he said quietly, his voice carrying easily across the stunned silence. "You learn respect now, or you learn pain." The crowd exploded. Phones appeared throughout the audience, capturing the impossible moment when David revealed himself to Goliath. The viral potential was enormous, but for entirely different reasons than Briggs had anticipated. The champion struggled to his feet, his face contorting with rage and embarrassment that threatened to overwhelm his tactical thinking. His undefeated record, his reputation, his entire identity as an unstoppable force, all of it suddenly in jeopardy against a janitor who moved like water and struck like lightning. The promise of the title had been delivered. The cocky boxer who had underestimated his opponent now understood he was facing something far more dangerous than an aging maintenance worker. The knockout might still be coming, but Tyler Thunder Briggs was no longer certain who would be delivering it. 1 hour after the impossible had become reality, Mickey's gym buzzed with electric energy that seemed to charge the stale air itself. Videos of the unknown janitor dropping Tyler Thunder Briggs were already spreading across social media like wildfire, shared and reshared by viewers who couldn't believe what they were seeing. Briggs sat slumped in the corner, eyes pressed against ribs that felt like they'd been hit by surgical strikes rather than punches. His ego bore deeper bruises than his body. 32 professional fights without ever feeling genuine pain. And now a 61-year-old maintenance worker had introduced him to agony with 3 lightning-fast shots. Rick Santelli paced frantically while shouting into his phone, trying to control damage that was spreading faster than he could contain it. Iron Mike Morrison examined the camera footage with the growing realization that they'd captured something unprecedented, not the easy beatdown they'd expected, but the birth of a legend. The front door exploded open with the force of controlled violence, and Vernon Castellazzo entered like a storm front moving inland. At 55, he carried himself with the predatory confidence of a man who'd spent 30 years climbing through Philadelphia's criminal hierarchy, leaving broken bones and shattered lives in his wake. 4 thugs flanked him, muscle-bound. Enforcers whose expensive suits couldn't hide the violence that radiated from them like heat from a furnace. Vernon's presence changed the room's atmosphere instantly, the excited chatter dying as neighborhood residents recognized the kind of danger that had just walked through their door. "What the fuck is this circus?" Vernon demanded, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to immediate obedience. His eyes swept the gym with calculating coldness, taking inventory of everything he saw: the viral videos, the cameras, the crowd, and most importantly, the old boxers who represented everything he'd walked away from decades ago. Lou Castellano looked up from the corner where Janet was examining his broken wrist, his face cycling through emotions as complex as a lifetime of regret. "Vernon," he said quietly, the single word carrying 30 years of estrangement, disappointment, and love that had never quite died despite everything that had happened between them. "Don't Vernon me, you pathetic old fool," his younger brother snarled, though something flickered behind his eyes. Pain, perhaps, or the ghost of affection he'd trained himself to bury. "You're making our family name look weak, getting beat up by some punk kid on camera for the whole world to see." He gestured dismissively at the ice pack Lou held against his injury. "This is what happens when dinosaurs try to play in the modern world. You get extinct." Bobby struggled to his feet despite Janet's protests, his weathered face flushed with anger that overrode his physical pain. "Lou doesn't need your kind of help, Vernon. He's got more honor in his broken wrist than you've got in your whole body." Vernon's smile was the kind that belonged on predators sizing up prey. "Honor doesn't pay medical bills, old man. Honor doesn't keep the lights on or the tax collectors away." He pulled out a thick roll of cash, waving it like a weapon. "This does." The ultimatum came with casual brutality. Yen would throw the inevitable rematch, losing convincingly and publicly, or the gym would burn with everyone inside. Vernon's thugs positioned themselves strategically, making it clear that this wasn't a negotiation. It was a demand backed by the kind of violence that had built his criminal empire. Yen watched from the corner, his mop abandoned, his grip shifting on the handle as Vernon's true nature revealed itself with each threatening word. That evening, Donnie Yen climbed the narrow stairs to his small apartment above Wang's Chinese restaurant, his legs heavy with more than physical exhaustion. The walls of his modest home told the story of a man caught between worlds: sparse furnishings that spoke of deliberate simplicity, a few Hong Kong movie posters rolled up in the closet like memories too painful to display, and a small altar where incense burned for people who existed now only in photographs. His laptop sat open on the kitchen table, its screen filled with news articles written in multiple languages. "Mysterious janitor stuns boxing champion," read one headline in English. "Hong Kong legend emerges from hiding," declared another in traditional Chinese characters that felt like ghosts from his past reaching across an ocean to find him. Bobby Kowalski had spent the afternoon becoming a detective, his weathered fingers, navigating search engines with surprising skill for a man his age. The evidence assembled itself like pieces of a puzzle that had been scattered across decades. Film stills, fight choreography credits, interviews with directors who spoke of Yen's real martial arts mastery with the reverence usually reserved for religious figures. Ip Man, Bobby whispered to himself, staring at footage from one of Yen's most famous films. The movements were identical to what he'd witnessed in the gym. The same flowing techniques, the same surgical precision, the same ability to generate devastating power from seemingly impossible positions. Eddie Martinez arrived at the restaurant. Just as the dinner rush was ending, his Parkinson's tremor more pronounced from the day's stress, but his military bearing intact. They found Yen in his apartment, sitting cross-legged on a meditation cushion, breathing with the controlled rhythm of someone seeking center in the midst of chaos. "Danny," Bobby said gently, using the Americanized name that had become a bridge between cultures. "We know who you are now." Yen opened his eyes slowly, unsurprised by their presence or their knowledge. In the soft light of his apartment, surrounded by the sense of ginger and soy sauce that drifted up from the restaurant below, he looked exactly like what he was, a man who'd spent 5 years trying to become invisible, only to have fate drag him back into the spotlight. "Why are you here?" Eddie asked, his voice carrying the directness of a soldier who'd learned that complicated questions sometimes had simple answers. "With your skills, your reputation, you could be anywhere, doing anything. Why Philadelphia? Why a mop and bucket?" Yen served them tea with the precise ceremony of someone for whom every gesture carried meaning. The cups were simple porcelain, nothing fancy, but the ritual spoke of respect and tradition that transcended language barriers. "In movies," he said finally, his English clearer in the privacy of his home than it had ever been in public, "I pretend to be hero. Fight bad guys, save innocent people, make audience cheer. But it was just pretending, just dance for camera." He gestured around his modest apartment, at the life he'd built from honest work and genuine friendship. "Here, with you, I am just friend. No cameras, no audience, no pretending." When Bobby made joke, he laughed because he liked me, not because he wants something. When Eddie tells story about war, he trusts me with truth, not performance. The weight of fame, he explained, had become unbearable after his wife's death from cancer. The constant scrutiny, the inability to grieve privately, the way every human moment became commodity for public consumption. Philadelphia had offered something priceless: anonymity and the chance to discover who he was when stripped of celebrity. "This is better," he said simply, pouring more tea with hands that had once commanded millions of dollars per film, but now found peace in simpler gestures. "Here, I am real person, not movie star." But outside his window, Vernon's surveillance team was watching, waiting, and planning their next move. The next morning revealed the true scope of Vernon's malice. Mickey's gym looked like a war zone, slashed. Heavy bags bleeding their stuffing onto the floor, mirrors shattered into spider webs of broken glass, spray-painted threats covering the walls in crude red letters that screamed obscenities and promises of violence. But the physical destruction was just Vernon's opening statement. The real message had been delivered to Janet Kowalski's apartment at 3 in the morning. Photographs of her walking to her car, entering her medical school building, having coffee with friends. No words necessary. The implication was crystal clear: cooperate or watch everyone you love suffer. Janet stood in the destroyed gym, her medical student's composure cracking as she surveyed the deliberate cruelty of men who turned destruction into art form. At 28, she'd inherited her grandfather's stubborn courage, but she'd also developed the analytical mind of someone training to save lives rather than destroy them. "There's something you need to know," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. She pulled out a USB drive that looked innocuous but contained enough evidence to destroy Vernon's criminal empire. "I've been documenting his activities for months through the legal aid clinic where I volunteer." The revelation hit the old boxers like a physical blow. Their gentle Janet, who brought them homemade cookies and bandaged their training injuries, had been operating as an undercover investigator, gathering evidence on one of Philadelphia's most dangerous criminals. Financial records, recorded conversations, witness statements, she continued, plugging the drive into Bobby's old laptop. Vernon's been running drugs through construction sites, fixing fights at underground venues, laundering money through legitimate businesses. I have enough to put him away for decades, but I need 2 more weeks to make it bulletproof. Eddie's military mind immediately grasped the tactical situation. So you need us to keep him distracted while you finish building the case. Use ourselves as bait to buy you time. The weight of that responsibility settled over them like a burial shroud. They weren't just fighting for their gym anymore. They were soldiers in a war against the kind of evil that poisoned entire communities, one corrupted soul at a time. Yen arrived to find them huddled around the laptop, his face darkening as he surveyed the destruction of the sanctuary that had become his true home. Vernon's vandals had been thorough. Even the photographs of boxing legends had been torn from their frames, decades of history reduced to scattered pieces of torn paper. They threatened Janet. Bobby said simply, knowing that those 3 words would mean more to Yen than any lengthy explanation. In the 5 years they'd known him, they'd watched the quiet janitor's face light up whenever the young medical student visited, had seen him save the best cookies from her grandmother's care packages, had noticed how he always found extra tasks to perform whenever she was helping at the community center. Yen knelt among the scattered photographs, carefully gathering pieces of torn history with the reverence of someone collecting fragments of sacred text. His hands moved with surgical precision, but his eyes held a coldness that none of them had ever seen before. The look of a predator calculating exactly how much pain would be required to balance the scales of justice. "How long you need?" he asked Janet, his English stripped of all pretense, clear and direct as surgical steel. 2 weeks, she replied, understanding instinctively that she was looking at a man who'd just made a decision that would change everything. Maybe less, if I can get more witnesses to come forward. Yen nodded once, a gesture that somehow managed to convey absolute commitment and deadly promise in the space of a single movement. Vernon wanted a war. Then a war he would have, but it would be fought on terms the criminal had never imagined, against an opponent whose skills had been honed in places where defeat meant more than mere humiliation. It meant death. Across town in an upscale gym that smelled of expensive leather and privilege, Tyler "Thunder" Briggs trained like a man, possessed by demons he couldn't exorcise. The humiliation of being dropped by a 61-year-old janitor had shattered something fundamental in his psyche, replacing his natural arrogance with desperate, frantic energy that burned through his system like acid. He'd hired 6 different sparring partners in attempts to simulate Yen's fighting style, paying premium rates for men who specialized in unorthodox techniques. But none could replicate the fluid precision he'd faced, the way the older man seemed to move between raindrops without getting wet, turning devastating power into empty air through subtle shifts in timing and positioning. Iron Mike Morrison watched his fighter with growing concern, recognizing the signs of a man approaching the edge of psychological collapse. Briggs threw combinations with manic intensity, his perfect form deteriorating into wild swings powered more by rage than technique. "You're overtraining," Morrison warned, but his words bounced off Briggs like rain off a windshield. The champion had retreated into obsessive preparation, convinced that more repetitions would somehow undo the impossible reality of what had happened in that decrepit gym. The real secret lived in Iron Mike's gym bag, hidden beneath towels and training. Gear like contraband from a war that couldn't be won through honest means. For years, Morrison had been providing Briggs with performance-enhancing drugs that pushed his natural abilities far beyond their normal limits. Steroids for size and strength, stimulants for speed and aggression, recovery enhancers that allowed him to train beyond human endurance. Without chemical assistance, Tyler "Thunder" Briggs was still a skilled boxer, but nowhere near championship level. His undefeated record had been built on a foundation of pharmaceutical enhancement that turned him into something more than human. And now he faced an opponent who achieved the impossible through pure skill and decades of disciplined training. The knock on the gym's back door came at exactly noon, punctual as clockwork. Vernon Castellazzo entered with the casual confidence of a man who owned pieces of the city that most people never knew were for sale. His expensive suit couldn't hide the predator underneath, but it provided useful camouflage in the kind of establishment where money talked louder than morality. "Heard you had some trouble with an old man," Vernon said. his voice carrying the mockery of someone who viewed other people's pain as entertainment. Embarrassing, really. Good thing I'm here to help. He produced a small vial filled with clear liquid that seemed to catch and hold the gym's harsh fluorescent light. The contents looked innocuous, like sterile water from a medical supply cabinet, but Vernon's smile suggested something far more dangerous. New cocktail from my chemist. He continued, setting the vial on the equipment bench like a priest placing a sacred relic on an altar. Undetectable strength enhancer, aggression booster, pain suppressor. Everything you need to turn that old bastard into a cautionary tale about knowing your place. Briggs stared at the vial with the fascination of a drowning man spotting a life preserver. He'd been using Vernon's pharmaceutical assistance for years, but this represented crossing a line into territory that frightened even him. The clear liquid promised power beyond anything he'd ever experienced, and dependency that would make him Vernon's property forever. "What's the catch?" he asked, though they both knew he was going to take it regardless of the answer. Vernon's smile widened, revealing teeth that belonged on a shark sizing up wounded prey. "No catch. Just remember who your friends are when this is over. I've got plans for that, Jim, and I need someone with your talents to help implement them." Morrison watched the exchange with growing unease, recognizing that they were witnessing something that went far beyond boxing or even illegal enhancement. This was about power, control, and the kind of violence that left permanent scars on everyone it touched. But Briggs was already reaching for the vial, his pride having overridden every survival instinct he possessed. The humiliation of losing to Yen had become unbearable, and he'd do anything, take any risk, make any deal, to restore his shattered self-image. The clear liquid disappeared down his throat like poison disguised as medicine, and Vernon's smile suggested that was exactly what it was. Back at Mickey's gym, the old boxers worked together with the grim determination of soldiers rebuilding a bombed-out bunker. Despite their combined age of over 200 years and Lou's broken wrist, they attacked the destruction with tools salvaged from decades of construction work and stubborn Irish pride that refused to surrender to vandalism. Bobby swept broken glass with methodical precision, each careful movement belying the fire burning in his chest every time he looked at the spray-painted threats covering walls that had once displayed photographs of neighborhood legends. Eddie organized salvageable equipment with military efficiency, his Parkinson's tremor more pronounced under stress, but his organizational skills sharp as ever. Lou worked one-handed, using his massive frame to move heavy equipment despite Janet's medical protests. The gentle giant's face carried a sadness deeper than physical pain, seeing his estranged brother's handiwork carved into a place that represented everything good about their shared neighborhood heritage. Yen moved among them like a ghost, appearing wherever help was needed most, steadying Lou when his balance faltered, helping Bobby lift debris too heavy for arthritic hands, wordlessly taking Eddie's place when the tremor made fine motor control impossible. His presence had become the glue holding their makeshift family together. The community rallied with surprising speed. Mrs. Chun from the corner grocery brought cleaning supplies and refused payment. Big Tony from the auto shop arrived with industrial fans to clear the spray paint fumes. Even Officer Patricia Murphy, who remembered the gym's glory days from her childhood, stopped by with coffee and donuts, turning a blind eye to the obviously retaliatory nature of the vandalism. "You need to be careful," Murphy warned Bobby quietly, her cop instincts recognizing gang activity when she saw it. This wasn't random teenagers. Someone with resources wanted to send a message. But it was 12-year-old Marcus Williams who provided the day's most important revelation. The boy had been hiding behind a dumpster when Vernon's crew struck, watching through a gap in the chain-link fence as they systematically destroyed everything they could reach. "Mr. Danny," Marcus said quietly, tugging on Yen's janitor uniform, with the urgency of someone carrying dangerous secrets. "I saw them put something in your water bottle. The bad men. They was talking about making you sick for the fight." Yen knelt to the boy's eye level, his face grave as he processed this intelligence. Poison, drugs, sabotage. Vernon was escalating beyond simple intimidation into attempted murder. The criminal understood that Yen represented a threat to his entire operation, not just his immediate plans for the gym. "You sure about this?" Yen asked gently, switching to the clear English he used in moments of absolute seriousness. Marcus nodded vigorously. Real sure. My big brother used to work for that man before he got arrested. I know what his people look like. Janet felt her blood run cold as the implications sank in. Her grandfather's quiet janitor friend wasn't just facing a boxing match anymore. He was walking into an assassination attempt disguised as entertainment. Yen stood slowly, his decision crystallizing with the finality of water becoming ice. Vernon had just crossed the line from criminal opportunism into something personal and deadly. The war was no longer about protecting the gym or buying time for Janet's investigation. Now it was about survival, and Donnie Yen had spent 40 years learning how to make other people regret threatening the innocent people he'd chosen to protect. That evening, Yen walked through the community center's after-school program like a man saying goodbye to everything that mattered. Children aged 6 to 14 surrounded him with the easy affection reserved for adults who'd earned their trust. Through patience and genuine kindness rather than authority and fear. "Mr. Danny, will you teach us more Wing Chun tomorrow?" asked 8-year-old Sophia Martinez, Eddie's granddaughter, whose dark eyes held the same determined spark that had carried her grandfather through 2 tours in Vietnam. Yin knelt beside her small desk where she struggled with homework that should have been beyond her grade level. The kind of advanced work that bright children tackled when their families believed education was the only ladder out of neighborhoods where hope went to die. "Maybe," he said gently, helping her navigate a math problem that would have challenged high school students. "What most important thing I teach you about fighting?" Sophia's hand shot up with the enthusiasm of someone who'd been waiting for exactly this question. "Only fight to protect people who can't protect themselves. And second most important, sometimes best fight is one you don't have," she recited, repeating lessons he'd taught through stories and demonstrations that made ancient martial arts wisdom accessible to children who lived in a world where violence was currency and respect was earned through fear. Around the room, other children worked on homework, played educational games, and participated in activities that kept them safe during the dangerous hours between school dismissal and their parents' return from second jobs. The community center served 200 families, providing not just after-school care, but meals, tutoring, and the kind of structured environment that gave children alternatives to the streets where Vernon's drug dealers recruited new soldiers every day. Marcus Williams approached with the careful steps of someone carrying adult responsibilities on 12-year-old shoulders. His mother worked double shifts at the hospital, leaving him responsible for his 2 younger sisters and the kind of mature decision-making that should have been years in his future. "Mr. Danny," Marcus said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of someone who'd seen too much of the world's darkness too early. "My mom heard about the fight. She's scared they're gonna hurt you like they hurt my cousin Darnell." Yen's expression darkened slightly. Darnell Williams had been 17 when Vernon's crew found him skimming money from their drug operation. The boy's broken body had been discovered in an alley 3 blocks away. His death officially ruled a gang initiation gone wrong, but understood by everyone in the neighborhood as Vernon's message about the consequences of disloyalty. "Your mom is smart woman," Yen replied, his English taking on the precise diction he used when discussing serious matters with people who deserved honest answers. "But sometimes grown-ups have to fight bullies so children don't have to." He looked around the room at faces that represented the neighborhood's future, children whose potential could flourish in safety or wither under the influence of predators, who viewed innocence as commodity to be harvested and sold. Vernon's criminal empire thrived by corrupting exactly these kids, turning promising students into drug runners and bright futures into cautionary tales. The choice wasn't really a choice at all. These children had given him something more valuable than any movie contract or martial arts championship. They'd given him purpose that transcended personal glory or individual achievement. They called him Mr. Danny with genuine affection, trusted him with their fears and dreams, looked at him like he was someone worthy of respect rather than celebrity worship. As he helped Marcus with a reading assignment about heroes and literature, Yen understood with crystal clarity that he couldn't abandon these children to Vernon's influence, couldn't run away to another city and hope someone else would stand between innocence and evil. He was exactly where he belonged, doing exactly what he was meant to do, protecting people who couldn't protect themselves, regardless of the personal cost. The attempted sabotage came at dawn, just as Yen arrived for his daily routine. Three of Vernon's thugs had broken into the gym through the back door, moving with the practiced efficiency of men who specialized in intimidation through petty destruction. They'd already contaminated his water bottle with a cocktail of drugs, designed to cause disorientation, nausea, and muscle weakness. Chemical warfare disguised as pre-fight preparation. Bobby Kowalski had arrived early, his old boxer's instincts sensing danger in the unusual silence that greeted him. At 72, he still moved with the careful awareness of someone who'd spent decades learning to read environments for signs of trouble, and something about the gym's atmosphere felt wrong. Too quiet, too still, like a predator holding its breath before striking. He found them in Yen's utility closet, their hands busy with vials and syringes that belonged in a chemist's laboratory rather than a janitor's workspace. The confrontation was brief and brutal. Three men in their 30s against one grandfather, who refused to let evil triumph through cowardice and silence. They beat him with methodical cruelty, using brass knuckles and weighted gloves that left marks designed to send messages about the consequences of interference. But Bobby had absorbed punishment from professionals for 15 years in the ring, and Payne was an old friend who'd taught him that courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was doing what needed to be done despite terror that threatened to paralyze rational thought. He managed to knock the contaminated bottle from their hands, watching it shatter against the concrete floor in a spray of clear liquid that looked innocuous but carried chemical death designed specifically for Donnie Yen's metabolism and fighting. "Wait, tell your boss." Bobby gasped between blows that rattled his dentures and filled his mouth with the copper taste of blood, that real fighters don't need poison to win. They left him unconscious in the parking lot, his weathered face. A roadmap of fresh bruises that told the story of an old warrior's final stand against impossible odds. Eddie found him 20 minutes later, cradling Bobby's head while calling for Janet with the kind of controlled panic that belonged to soldiers who'd seen too many good men fall. Janet arrived in her Honda Civic with medical supplies and the fierce determination of someone who'd inherited her grandfather's fighting spirit along with his stubborn refusal to surrender to bullies. Her examination revealed cracked ribs, severe concussion, and multiple contusions, but also something more important. Bobby's hands showed fresh damage from landing punches, proof that he'd given better than he'd received. "I got them good," Bobby mumbled through swollen lips, his eyes still sharp despite the head trauma. "Broke that fancy boy's nose and gave another one something to remember me by. They won't forget that this old fossil still has some fight left." Yen arrived to find his surrogate family gathered around Bobby like mourners at a wake, their faces carrying the grim expressions of people who'd just realized that war had been declared on everything they held sacred. The broken bottle in his utility closet told the complete story. Vernon had escalated from intimidation to attempted murder, crossing lines that even experienced criminals usually avoided. Agent Patricia Collins materialized like divine intervention disguised as federal law enforcement, her FBI credentials providing legitimacy to what had become a neighborhood war against organized crime. She'd been monitoring Vernon's communications through wiretaps and surveillance that revealed the true scope of his criminal empire. "This is it," she told Janet quietly, her voice carrying the satisfaction of someone who'd spent 2 years building an airtight case. Attempted murder of a federal witness, conspiracy to commit assault, interstate drug trafficking. We've got enough to put him away for life, but we need him to make one more mistake, something so public and undeniable that his lawyers can't plea bargain their way out of justice. All eyes turned to Yen, who stood among them like a sword, waiting to be drawn from its sheath. The time for patience and defensive strategies had ended. Vernon wanted a war. Then he would face an opponent whose skills had been forged in places where defeat meant death, and victory required the kind of precision that turned combat into art form. The final confrontation arrived with the theatrical flourish that Vernon Castellazzo brought to all his most important business dealings. He burst through the gym's front door at exactly 3 o'clock, accompanied by Tyler Briggs and enough firepower to start a small war. 8 armed thugs, 2 camera crews, and the kind of arrogant confidence that belonged to predators who'd never faced genuine opposition. The gym had been transformed into an arena through Vernon's criminal connections and unlimited budget. Professional lighting equipment cast harsh shadows across a space cleared of all equipment except the ring itself, which had been stripped down to its essential components: canvas, ropes, and enough room for two men to settle their differences through violence that would be recorded for posterity. Neighborhood residents filled the space under implied duress, their faces carrying the resigned expressions of people who'd learned that resistance to Vernon's will brought consequences that extended far beyond individual suffering. Families, with children, elderly couples who'd lived in the area for decades, small business owners who depended on Vernon's protection, all of them pressed into service as unwilling audience for what he'd billed as educational entertainment. Ladies and gentlemen, Vernon announced with the theatrical flair of a circus ringmaster introducing the main attraction. Tonight you'll witness what happens when the old world meets the new, when tradition gets its ass kicked by evolution. Briggs stood beside him like a weapon waiting to be deployed, his enhanced physique gleaming under the professional lights. The clear liquid Vernon had provided had transformed him into something beyond human, stronger, faster, more aggressive than any natural athlete could achieve. His eyes held the glassy sheen of chemical enhancement, pupils dilated with synthetic rage that made him vibrate with barely contained violence. No referee, no time limits, no rules except one. Vernon continued, his voice carrying across the gym like a judge pronouncing sentence. Fight until someone can't continue. Winner walks away, loser learns about the natural order. The threat beneath his words needed no elaboration. If Yen won, the gym burned with everyone inside. If Briggs won convincingly, Vernon would disappear and leave the neighborhood in peace. A lie so transparent that even the children present understood. They were witnessing extortion disguised as entertainment. But Vernon had made one crucial miscalculation in his orchestration of this final confrontation. Hidden throughout the crowd, FBI agent Patricia Collins had positioned federal agents with equipment capable of recording every word, every threat, every moment of criminal behavior that would ensure Vernon's conviction on charges carrying life sentences. Janet's wire was active, broadcasting to receivers that would preserve every sound for courtroom presentation. The evidence Vernon was creating through his own arrogance would become the foundation for prosecutions that would dismantle his entire criminal organization. Yen stepped forward with the calm precision of someone who'd spent 40 years preparing for exactly this moment. The enhanced Briggs represented everything wrong with modern athletic culture: shortcuts over discipline, chemicals over character, brute force over refined technique. "I am teacher," Yen said quietly, his voice carrying easily across the tense silence. "Today, you both learn." The words hit Vernon like physical blows, carrying implications that the criminal was only beginning to understand. He'd brought a chemically enhanced heavyweight to fight a legend. But legends weren't made through pharmaceutical assistance. They were forged through decades of discipline, suffering, and the kind of training that turned human beings into something approaching perfection. Briggs charged forward with synthetic fury, but Yen advanced to meet him, and everyone present understood they were about to witness something that would be remembered long after the last echo faded from Mickey's gym. The teacher was about to deliver his final lesson. The enhanced Tyler Briggs was no longer entirely human. Vernon's chemical cocktail had transformed him into something that moved with supernatural speed and struck with the force of industrial machinery. His first combination came faster than anything he'd ever thrown before, a blur of fists that should have ended the fight before it truly began. But Donnie Yen flowed around the assault like smoke dancing through hurricane winds, his Wing Chun training allowing him to redirect rather than absorb the tremendous forces being directed at his body. Each punch that should have shattered bone whistled harmlessly past as Yen demonstrated the difference between raw power and refined technique. The crowd gasped as they witnessed something impossible: a 61-year-old man making a chemically enhanced heavyweight look like an amateur throwing wild haymakers in a parking lot brawl. But Yen understood what others missed. The steroids made Briggs stronger, but they also made him reckless, burning through his energy reserves at an unsustainable rate. "You see," Yen said quietly, his voice carrying across the gym despite the chaos of combat. "Power without wisdom is just noise." He began targeting specific pressure points with surgical precision. nerve clusters that would gradually drain Briggs' enhanced strength, acupuncture points that disrupted the artificial energy coursing through his system. Each strike was a masterclass in human anatomy, demonstrating how centuries of martial arts study could overcome modern pharmaceutical enhancement. Briggs threw a devastating uppercut powered by synthetic rage, the kind of punch that had destroyed 32 previous opponents. But Yen caught it in his palm, using classical Wing Chun trapping techniques, redirecting the force harmlessly while simultaneously striking 3 different nerve points along Briggs' extended arm. The champion's enhanced reflexes began betraying him as overstimulated muscles cramped and twitched beyond his conscious control. Vernon's chemical assistance was becoming a liability, pushing Briggs' cardiovascular system beyond safe limits while his opponent remained as calm as morning mist. "Angry make you stupid," Yen observed, demonstrating the centerline theory by slipping between Briggs' increasingly desperate combinations. "Strong body, weak mind. This is why you lose." For 5 minutes, the enhanced Briggs threw everything in his considerable arsenal, while Yen flowed around each attack like water finding its natural course. The contrast was stark and educational. Brute force meeting refined technique, chemical enhancement confronting 4 decades of disciplined training. Then Briggs landed his first clean shot. The enhanced uppercut caught Yen in the ribs and lifted him completely off his feet, sending him crashing into the gym's brick wall with enough force to crack mortar. The crowd fell silent as their unlikely champion slumped against the wall, blood trickling from the corner of his mouth. Vernon's thugs cheered while the neighborhood residents held their breath, watching their last hope struggle to regain his footing. Briggs flexed for the cameras, convinced that his pharmaceutical advantages had finally overcome the old man's impossible skills. But Yen rolled with the impact, using the wall to spring back to his feet with movements that belonged to someone half his age. He wiped blood from his mouth and smiled, not with pain, but with the satisfaction of someone who'd just learned everything he needed to know about his opponent's capabilities. "Now I understand your power," he said quietly, settling into a stance that somehow looked more dangerous than anything he'd shown before. "Time for you to understand mine." While Yen battled the enhanced Briggs in the center of the gym, the old boxers proved that courage and experience could triumph over youth and numbers. Bobby Kowalski, despite his injuries from the morning's beating, moved with the ring savvy of someone who'd spent 15 years learning to think 3 moves ahead of younger, stronger opponents. When one of Vernon's thugs rushed him with a baseball bat, Bobby used the classical footwork that had made him Lightning Bobby for decades earlier, not to hit harder, but to make others miss completely. The bat whistled past his head as he stepped inside and delivered a perfect left hook to the attacker's solar plexus, dropping the man like a sack of cement. Eddie Martinez's Parkinson's tremor disappeared the moment combat began, his military training overriding neurological damage through pure force of will. The Marine sergeant who'd survived 2 tours in Vietnam emerged from behind the elderly grandfather's facade, disarming opponents with techniques learned in jungles where hesitation meant death. "Semper Fi, motherfucker," Eddie growled, using a knife hand strike to disable a thug's weapon arm before following up with a knee to the midsection that folded the man in half. His hands might shake when pouring coffee, but they remained steady as surgical instruments when protecting his brothers in arms. Lou Castellano fought one-handed due to his broken wrist, but his massive frame and construction worker's strength made him a human wrecking ball. He absorbed punishment that would have dropped smaller men, then retaliated with haymaker punches that sent attackers flying across the gym like rag dolls launched from catapults. "Sorry," Lou apologized after each devastating blow, his gentle nature unable to overcome a lifetime of politeness even in the midst of violence. "Didn't want to hurt you, but you shouldn't have threatened the children." The 3 old warriors formed a protective triangle around the fight, ensuring that Yen faced only the opponent he'd chosen while they handled Vernon's attempts to interfere through superior numbers. Their different fighting styles complemented each other perfectly. Bobby's boxing technique, Eddie's military tactics, and Lou's raw power creating an impenetrable barrier around their champion. Vernon watched his carefully orchestrated plan crumbling as septuagenarians systematically dismantled his enforcement crew. These weren't the helpless old men he'd expected to intimidate. These were warriors who'd simply been waiting for someone worthy of their final battle. Kill them all, Vernon screamed, his composure finally cracking as he realized that his criminal empire was being destroyed by men old enough to be his grandfathers. Burn this fucking place down. But before his remaining thugs could escalate to lethal force, the gym's doors exploded inward with the controlled violence of a federal raid. Agent Patricia Collins led 8 FBI agents through the entrance, their weapons drawn and voices shouting commands that cut through the chaos like thunder. Federal agents. Everyone on the ground. Now. Vernon's face went white as he realized the scope of his miscalculation. The neighborhood gathering he'd orchestrated for intimidation had become a federal crime scene, with every threat and violent act being recorded by equipment that would ensure his conviction on charges carrying multiple life sentences. You're under arrest for conspiracy, racketeering, attempted murder, and about 20 other charges I'll read you at the station, Collins announced, her satisfaction evident as handcuffs clicked around Vernon's wrists. But even as his criminal empire collapsed around him, Vernon's enhanced weapon continued fighting in the center of the gym, chemical rage overriding rational thought as Briggs launched himself at Yen with the desperate fury of someone who'd staked everything on pharmaceutical assistance. The real fight was just beginning, and everyone present understood they were witnessing something that would be remembered long after the last arrest report was filed. With Vernon's arrest unfolding around them like a storm breaking over calm water, Donnie Yen and Tyler Briggs continued their battle in the eye of chaos. The champion's chemical enhancement had reached its peak, flooding his system with synthetic strength and artificial courage that made him more dangerous than any natural athlete could ever become. Briggs launched his most vicious assault yet, throwing combinations powered by pharmaceutical fury and the desperate understanding that his entire identity depended on destroying the man who'd exposed his fundamental weaknesses. His fists moved like pistons driven by industrial machinery, each punch carrying enough force to shatter concrete. But Yen had been studying him, timing his breathing, calculating the rate at which the steroids were burning through his cardiovascular system. Now he unleashed his full arsenal for the first time. Wing Chun combined with elements from his film training, techniques borrowed from kickboxing and kung fu styles, 40 years of martial arts mastery flowing together like tributaries, forming a river. The 1-inch punch came first, demonstrating how seemingly impossible power could be generated through perfect body mechanics and timing. From a range where Briggs thought he was safe, Yen's fist exploded forward with devastating force. The impact, traveling through the champion's enhanced musculature like electricity through copper wire. Briggs staggered backward, his eyes widening with the first taste of genuine fear he'd ever experienced in a boxing ring. The old man wasn't just surviving his enhanced assault. He was systematically dismantling it through techniques that belonged in textbooks rather than street fights. This is Wing Chun, Yen explained quietly, settling into the classical centerline stance that had been perfected over centuries of combat application. You learn now why shortcuts never work against real training. He flowed into chain punching, rapid-fire strikes that started at Briggs' chest and worked upward with metronome precision. Each punch landed exactly where Yen intended, targeting nerve clusters and pressure points that disrupted the artificial enhancement coursing through his opponent's system. The demonstration became a masterclass in practical martial arts application. Every technique carried symbolic meaning. This wasn't just fighting, it was education disguised as combat, philosophy expressed through physical action that taught lessons about discipline, respect, and the difference between strength and power. Briggs realized he was facing not just a man, but a living embodiment of martial arts tradition, someone who'd spent decades perfecting techniques that most people only saw in movies. The enhanced strength that had made him feel invincible now seemed pathetic against skills honed through legitimate suffering and honest dedication. Who are you? Briggs gasped between attacks, his pharmaceutical courage crumbling as he faced something beyond his comprehension. What are you? Yen's response came through action rather than words. He caught Briggs' most powerful punch-in, a classical Wing Chun trap, controlling his opponent's balance while simultaneously striking 3 different pressure points with surgical precision. The sequence took less than 2 seconds, but demonstrated mastery that required lifetimes to achieve. I am what you could have been. Yin said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of someone who understood the difference between talent wasted and potential fulfilled. If you had chosen discipline over shortcuts, respect over arrogance, character over chemicals. The crowd watched in stunned silence as their humble janitor revealed himself as something approaching perfection, not through genetic gifts or pharmaceutical enhancement, but through the kind of dedicated training that transformed ordinary human beings into legends worthy of the title. Briggs launched one final, desperate combination powered by everything he had left, chemical enhancement and natural ability combining in a last-ditch effort to overcome the impossible. But Yin was ready, and what happened next would be remembered as the moment when authentic mastery met artificial power and showed the world which one truly mattered. The steroids had turned against Tyler Briggs with the cruel efficiency of poison disguised as medicine. His heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird, his enhanced muscles cramped from overexertion, and his coordination deteriorated. As the chemical assistance wore off, leaving behind only the hollow shell of artificial confidence, Donnie Yen recognized the symptoms immediately. He'd seen performance-enhancing drugs destroy fighters throughout his career, watched strong men become dependent on chemicals that promised easy victory, but delivered only temporary illusion. His response wasn't to increase his aggression, but to slow his attack, more concerned with teaching than destroying. "You see what happens?" Yen said quietly, his voice carrying the patient tone of someone who'd spent decades training actors and stunt performers. Body become weak when you use shortcuts. Real strength come from inside, from years of training, from discipline you never learn. Each exchange became a lesson disguised as combat. When Briggs threw a wild haymaker powered by desperation, Yin demonstrated proper timing by slipping the punch and countering with a precise strike to the ribs. When the champion tried to clinch out of exhaustion, Yin showed him how leverage and balance could overcome brute strength. "You angry?" Yin observed, easily avoiding another frustrated combination. "Angry make you stupid. Stupid make you predictable. Predictable make you easy to beat." The crowd had become students without realizing it, watching a master class in martial arts philosophy expressed through practical application. This wasn't just fighting, it was education, wisdom passed down through generations of practitioners who'd learned that true victory came through understanding rather than domination. Briggs' enhanced reflexes, which had made him feel superhuman just minutes earlier, now betrayed him as overstimulated nerves. Fired randomly, his perfect muscular definition, built through chemical assistance rather than honest training, began to work against him as his cardiovascular system struggled to supply oxygen to artificially enlarged tissue. "Please," Briggs gasped, his voice carrying the broken quality of someone discovering that everything he'd built his identity around was fundamentally hollow. "I don't understand what's happening to me." For the first time since the fight began, Yin's expression softened with something approaching compassion. Despite everything Briggs had done, the humiliation of the old boxers, the destruction of their sanctuary, the threats against innocent people, he was still young enough to learn, still salvageable if someone cared enough to teach him properly. "Chemical make you feel strong, but real strength come from here," Yin said, tapping his chest over his heart. "And here," he continued, touching his temple, "body just tool. If tool broken, you still have mind, still have spirit. These things no one can take from you." The lesson was interrupted by Briggs' final, desperate assault. A combination thrown with everything he had left, pharmaceutical enhancement and natural ability combining in one last attempt to overcome the impossible. But the attack was exactly what Yin had been waiting for, the perfect setup for the technique that would end not just the fight, but Briggs' illusions about what it meant to be truly strong. "Now you ready to learn?" Yin said quietly, positioning himself for the finishing sequence with movements that belonged to someone who'd spent 40 years perfecting the art of controlled violence. The one-inch punch was coming, and with it, the lesson that would teach Tyler Thunder Briggs the difference between being a champion and being a warrior. Donnie Yen's one-inch punch came from impossible range, generating tremendous power through perfect body mechanics that defied physics textbooks. From a distance where Briggs thought he was safe, Yen's fist exploded forward with devastating precision, The impact traveling through the champions enhanced musculature like electricity through water. But instead of ending the fight immediately, Yen used the technique to position Briggs for his signature finishing combination. The one-inch punch was merely the setup, a demonstration of power that left the champion stunned and vulnerable for what came next. The chain punching sequence began at chest level and worked upward with metronome precision. Each strike landed exactly where Yen intended: solar plexus, ribs, sternum, throat. A symphony of controlled violence that overwhelmed Briggs' enhanced defenses through sheer technical perfection rather than brute force. Wing Chun theory became practical application as Yen demonstrated the devastating effectiveness of centerline attacks. Every punch flowed from the previous one without wasted motion, creating an unstoppable chain of strikes that built momentum like a machine designed for maximum efficiency. The final punch lifted Briggs completely off his feet, sending him crashing backward into the gym's padded wall with enough force to shake dust from the ceiling beams. He slid down slowly, consciousness fading before he hit the ground. The knockout was indeed unforgettable, not just for its technical perfection, but for the lesson it taught about the difference between artificial enhancement and authentic mastery. Tyler Briggs lay motionless as Janet rushed to check his vital signs, her medical training overriding everything else despite her anger at what he'd done to her grandfather. The steroids had pushed his cardiovascular system beyond safe limits. But he was breathing steadily, alive despite the punishment his body had endured. Donnie Yen knelt beside his fallen opponent, showing the same concern he'd demonstrated throughout the fight. Despite everything Briggs had done, he was still someone's son, still young enough to learn from his mistakes if given the chance. The viral videos were already spreading across social media like wildfire, but this time they told a different story. Instead of a bully humiliating the weak, viewers saw a master defending the innocent, a legend emerging from hiding to protect his adopted community from predators who preyed on kindness. Vernon's criminal organization crumbled as FBI agents arrested 23 associates in coordinated raids across Philadelphia. The evidence Janet had gathered, combined with Vernon's recorded threats, ensured prison sentences that would keep him away from the neighborhood for decades. Within hours, donations poured in from around the world. The gym's financial problems vanished overnight, with enough money to renovate the facility, expand community programs, and ensure the old boxers could continue their daily routines in dignity and safety. But more than money, the story had captured something deeper: the triumph of genuine courage over artificial strength, tradition over shortcuts, community over individual glory. Mickey's gym became a symbol of resistance to those who would corrupt authentic achievement through chemical enhancement and criminal intimidation. 1 week later, Mickey's gym buzzed with renovation activity as contractors worked to restore and improve the facility that had become famous worldwide. Offers flooded in from Hollywood studios, television networks, and martial arts organizations, all wanting to capitalize on Donnie Yen's emergence from anonymity. Vernon Castellazzo received a 15-year federal sentence after pleading guilty to avoid life imprisonment. His criminal empire, built over 3 decades of violence and intimidation, disappeared overnight as legitimate businesses reclaimed territory that had been controlled through fear and corruption. Tyler Briggs vanished from public view, his championship stripped, his career destroyed by revelations about systematic steroid abuse. The young man who'd built his identity on artificial enhancement faced a future of health problems and legal consequences from years of pharmaceutical dependence. But the gym's true victory wasn't measured in arrests or ruined careers. It was seen in the children who returned to safe after-school programs, the families who no longer feared walking their neighborhood streets, the community that had rediscovered its capacity for collective resistance against those who would exploit the vulnerable. Lou Castellano's wrist healed well enough for light training, though he'd never regained full strength. More importantly, his brother's conviction freed him from 30 years of guilt about choosing different paths. He could finally mourn the relationship they'd lost while celebrating the family he'd chosen. Agent Patricia Collins received commendations for dismantling Vernon's organization, but her greatest satisfaction came from watching the community heal itself once the source of corruption had been removed. The gym had survived, and with it, the values it represented: courage, loyalty, and the belief that authentic strength came from character rather than chemicals. 3 months later, the renovated gym gleamed with new equipment while preserving its old-school character. The walls displayed photographs of boxing legends alongside pictures of the viral fight that had saved the facility, creating a bridge between past glory and present purpose. Donnie Yen arrived at exactly 8 a.m. as always, but now he was accompanied by a group of neighborhood children eager for their daily Wing Chun lesson. His role had evolved from janitor to teacher, though he still maintained the facility with the same meticulous care he'd always shown. The old boxers thrived in their restored sanctuary. Bobby had fully recovered, his injuries healing cleanly thanks to Janet's medical care. Eddie's Parkinson's symptoms stabilized through better treatment, and Lou resumed his role as the gentle giant who fixed broken equipment and settled disputes with patient wisdom. The community center served twice as many families as before, with expanded programs that included martial arts classes, senior fitness sessions, and youth mentorship opportunities. The neighborhood's crime rate had dropped significantly with Vernon's network eliminated, creating space for legitimate businesses and safe recreation. Celebrity offers continued arriving daily: movie deals, endorsement contracts, invitations to prestigious martial arts demonstrations around the world. Yen declined them all with the same polite response: "I have work to do here." As evening approached, Bobby found Yen finishing his cleaning routine with the same methodical precision he'd always shown. "Danny, with all them offers from Hollywood and such, why do you stay here with a bunch of old boxers?" Yen paused, looking around at the gym that had become his true home, then smiled genuinely for the first time in the story. "In movies, I pretend to be hero. Here, with you, I am friend. This is better." He returned to his mopping as Philadelphia evenings settled over a neighborhood made safer, stronger, and more united because one humble man had chosen community over celebrity, friendship over fame, and service over self. If you like the story, please watch another story on our channel and subscribe to the channel.